This episode, updating hardware for your home. It's more complicated than you think. Thinking about a simple yet effective project to update your home? How about changing the door hardware? The Handyman Pros have a discussion about door hardware changes. It might not be as simple as you think. Welcome to the Handyman Pros Radio Show. Home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros Radio Show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition is entitled Updating Hardware, Doorknobs, Hinges, and Door Stops. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, it's story time. Tell me a story about this week.
Yeah, it's story time. Well, I'm here, baby, and ready to rock and roll after last week. You know, it's kind of funny, Larry. Last week, I had a couple of calls, and it was funny. I replaced a bunch of doorknobs last week. You know, you and I were both on a project at one point.
And we did every doorknob in the place, yeah.
Would I replace like 18 doorknobs?
Something like that. It was a boatload.
You know, it's like, you know. Anyways, that was kind of funny. But last week was another week where I replaced a whole bunch of doorknobs. And it's one of these things where people are selling their homes, or they're just trying to update their homes and get rid of some of the old hardware, or that the doorknobs are just broken. You know,
right.
They're just all worn out and everything. Yep. And then as it turns out, I got an emergency call from somebody that their doorknob fell off. And I felt sorry for her because she couldn't get in, you know. She didn't know how to work the door. It was into like a pantry, and she was an older lady. And you know, folks, you need to know how to do that, because if one side of a doorknob falls off, you know, sometimes it can be a little intimidating. You know, what do you do with that mechanism in there to release that door?
To release the door, yeah.
So, you know, anyways, not to panic, but you know, so I did that. But it was just kind of funny. The whole week was, you know, consumed with a bunch of replacement of doorknobs.
Well, and
which
so
I was happy to do.
Yeah.
You know.
So when we were talking about
interior and exterior.
Yeah. So when we were talking about this at the beginning of the show, we thought, oh, you know, it's no big deal, right? And then we kind of got into it. We started walking through a project in our head, and we sort of decided this is a little. It's not that it's complicated, folks, but it's complicated enough, right, John? I mean, if you get into it, there's some stuff you have to be aware of, right?
Well, let me go through a couple things here, Larry, to just put this in perspective, if you'll allow me.
I will.
Now, what did I always say about, you know, your fallback position on any argument about where things come from is where?
China.
The Egyptians.
The Egyptians, yeah.
And you know, they used animal hides as doorknobs.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and now I'm pulling this off of the Schlage website. And, you know, folks, that's a pretty popular doorknob and accessory manufacturer. They give you a little bit of a history on doorknobs. And, you know, in the 1500s, Larry, as you can probably understand, there wasn't a whole lot of individual rooms. Everybody kind of lived in one great big room, so there's no need for doorknobs.
Right.
When you think about it, you know. And if I accelerate this up in, you know, doorknobs during the American Revolution really became the thing.
Because you could lock your door and keep the British out.
Because everybody started to have rooms.
Right. Right.
And it was kind of funny. Here's a little stat from 1830 to 1873. More than 100 U.S. patents were granted for doorknobs.
Wow.
And so we accelerate, and you know, into this era now, and we have, you know, all kinds of different decorative door hardware.
Yes.
So it's kind of funny that, you know, it hasn't been in retrospect, it hasn't been that long of, you know, doorknobs. And what we're going to discuss here is, you know, there's a lot to consider.
Most
people don't get it.
It's not out of anybody's scope of job to do. It's a relatively simple job. I think that there's some things you need to be aware of, right? So the first thing is like we're talking about upgrades, right? And so if you bought a house what do we want to say, John? Colors go through phases, right? So, at one time, in olden times, those old doorknobs you're talking about, which I've had the pleasure of working with many, many times, they were all made out of iron for the most part, and they were brown in color as a general rule. And really, at that point, you didn't have much choice because they were iron, and they might change color on their own. That was called rust, but they were basically iron, and they generally didn't get too rusty, largely because everybody's hands are a little bit oily, and every time they touch a doorknob, they'd put a very light sheen of oil on them. And those old and they used glass doorknobs back then as well too. So just depending on what the particulars were of the days. And when I'm saying back then, I'm talking in the 1800s and and before that, doorknobs.
That's funny you say that. Those glass doorknobs, because you're absolutely right.
Yep.
Those old homes that from the 1910s and the 20s.
Yep. All had glass doorknobs.
They all had glass doorknobs.
Yep. And you can still get those, folks, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
They're now they have them in acrylic, which is kind of a little better than glass because they're less expensive and not quite so heavy. But anyway, there's all kinds of different.
Or if you still have them, you can use them as the ends of your curtain rods.
That's right. That's a good use of an old piece of. We'll talk about that in a bit. What to do with your old doorknobs, right? It's a bit of a thing, but there's a lot of different reasons to upgrade things, and sometimes doorknobs get. Trust me, the doorknob is one of the most used items in your house, whether you believe it or not. You use your doorknobs every day. Most of the time, unless you leave a door standing open on an interior door, you use a doorknob every single day. It gets used and multiple times every single day. So it's quite a piece of equipment, actually, if you think about it. But so the reason that I mention this is just what are your goals, right? So if you want to update the look of your house, updating your doorknobs, if you've got all gold, not picking on gold doorknobs, but gold doorknobs were very 90s, right, John? I mean, you said your house is full of them,
yep.
right? And so if you wanted to update the look, you could go to whatever you choose to today. But I mean, you could put glass in, you could put brushed nickel in, you could put stainless steel, put whatever you want on. But there's plenty of things you can do to upgrade it. So, but we got talking about hardware. We thought we'd do, well, if you're going to do the doorknobs, you need to do the hinges as well, and then maybe the door stops too. So we're going to have a little discussion about all those things. But you got to have, what are your goals? What do you got? So what's the first step, John? What's the first thing you need to do?
Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to decide what a budget is for these things,
which entails counting the number of doors you have, right?
Yeah, and I'll let me throw out a little quick tip. If you're going to go out and replace your door hardware, buy decent door hardware. You don't have to buy top of the line. You don't have to do that, but you need to buy some decent hardware. I just dealt with some really bad stuff, and it was awful. You'll be totally frustrated. Anyways, that aside. But the point being is that you're going to have to budget for this stuff. You're going to have
it's not inexpensive. By the time you count, 17 doorknobs, right?
It is not inexpensive because, let's say that they're $15 to $20 a piece.
Right.
And, so do the math on that.
Yeah, it's simple math.
And if you're going to replace, 15 of these things, you're going to have a little bill there.
It's being a bit of money, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I think, Larry had, we were talking about some of the tools, and of course you can talk about that, Larry, in a second here. Is that you're going to have these kind of things. Just you want to be prepped. You want to be prepared.
Yeah. What do you need to do the job?
Budget.
Right?
You need to know what you want to do. Like you were just saying, hey, what's your goal? And just know so that everything goes smoothly. So you don't come home and you say, oh, wait a minute, now I got to delay this and delay that because I don't have, I don't have a chisel. I don't have this,
right.
In case I have to, a little mismatch of some dimensions.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Let's talk about it right now. So you got to have a goal. You need to know how many doors and how many pieces are you going to do at any given time, and then you need to budget for that because it does get expensive, right, John? I mean, literally, if you do, average house probably has 20 doors, probably average house.
Yeah.
I mean, so 20 times 20 is $400 just in doorknobs. And if you're going to do the doorknobs, you really have to think about doing the hinges, because if you have gold doorknobs and gold hinges and you don't change the hinges, you got a mismatch, and it looks funny, right? It looks like you did
Right.
half the job. And then the same thing, too, don't forget the doorstop, too. So if you have a doorstop in the wall, we'll get into doorstops in a bit. There's a bunch of different kinds there that you can look at and things like that. But anyway, so with that, that gets into that budget. Tools, what tools do you need? Well, John and I are big believers in you need a drill driver. You can use a screwdriver, but gosh, it's better to do it with a drill, with a powered drill, preferably cordless. I will say this. I had a guy come in and work on one of my houses, and he used an impact gun, and then he proceeded to strip out every single hinge when he screwed the screws in because he hit them too hard. So don't use impact guns, folks. That's just my 50 cents worth of opinion. Don't use impact guns because you'll strip out the holes, and then you've got a real mess on your hands. So you can fix it, but it's just you took a simple job and you made it difficult again. We're big believers in blue tape, John. Why? Because you can mark things up on. You put the tape on. You can pencil on it. You can do all kinds of things. It's also protects stuff. It's good. Have some blue tape. You got to have blue tape for everything. You might need a router or a chisel or something to fix the doors because when you change the hardware out, it doesn't always match perfectly on the door strike, right? So when the door closes, the little thing that slides into the hole doesn't always match. That's probably because the guy that put it in the first time didn't do it right, but he got it to work, so he left it. And John, you've experienced that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or as the house settles and things like that, things can move around, and you're gonna uncover that. Real quick.
You'll find out when the door actually closes,
Right.
but it doesn't latch, right? So
Right.
y'all, I'm sure you've experienced that. If you haven't, well, you will. It's not a question of if, it's when. The other thing you need is a hammer I use a nail set, but you can use any kind of, you can use a nail, something to knock the hinge pins out, right? Because you need to knock the hinge pins out if you're going to change out the hinges. So you need a hammer and something to knock the hinge pins out. We did want to talk about if you're going to put a door stop in, if you're going to put one into the baseboard, you usually need a wrench or some kind of tool some are put in with screws, some are put in with wrenches, but it just depends on the particulars, but you'll need something to do that. And John, we want to talk a little bit about lubricating the hinges as well. So you might need a little bit of hinge lubricant, which is generally graphite, if I remember correctly.
I like to use that dry lubricant stuff because I learned a long time ago in aviation, there's certain applications for oil, and then there's certain stuff that shouldn't be oiled, and oil picks up a lot of hair. It's sticky.
Hair,
after
dirt,
a while.
and dust. Yep.
And your hinges are gonna look awful.
Well, they're gonna have fuzz on them.
After about a year, they're gonna have stuff all over.
They have fuzz on them. So
you're gonna get that stuff that's known as a dry lubricant. It's a kind of a graphite, but anyways, yes.
Anyway, yep. So that's it. Did we think of any other tools? I think that was all you're really going to need.
Yeah, and hopefully that most of this you won't be using.
Right.
Because in my experience, most of these things have gone really, really smooth. But you're right. Every once in a while, there's going to be a mismatch that's going to have to be taken care of.
Needs to be taken care of. Yeah.
So now's the time to fix those doors while you're doing this.
Yeah, remember, this is a bit of Larry wisdom. The things that you use every single day, multiple times a day, are the things that will drive you crazy if they don't work properly. Right? So every time you shut that door, if you have to pull up on the door to get it to latch, that will drive you insane after a while. Eventually you'll get to where you ignore it, but if you fix it and you close the door and it closes, you're like, man, that's been bugging me for 10 years.
Right. Especially, and then folks go back and listen to, our door hinge thing where we teach you how to, we talk about how to stop doors from swinging open, things like that, an easy fix, because that's the other thing that'll drive you nuts. So in other words, you might as well, like Larry said, you might as well get all this done correctly the first time so that these things don't drive you nuts for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's true. John, let's talk to us a little bit about purchasing doorknobs and purchasing stuff that you need for your doors. But talk about that a little bit.
Well, of course, when and this is pretty pretty common sense, but when you think about it, folks, there's different types of. Let's just talk about interior doorknobs. There's different types of interior doorknobs. One has a lock that you would use in a bedroom.
Yep.
Then there's others that don't. They still have a handle that turns and things. They might be for a closet. Okay. So there's different types of doorknobs for interior use that you're going to run across.
And then dummy knobs too, right, John? Which
and
is one that doesn't turn at all, but
it doesn't turn at all. You just pull on it.
Pull on it. Yep.
So I've got a couple of small doors like that here in my house that have these things called dummy knobs on it. But you're going to have different types of these doorknobs for interior use, and you just need to know. And when you go out and buy them, you need to know what you're going to buy. Hey, I got 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. Okay, there's those types. Then I've got 6 closets or whatever they are. Then there's those types. You just don't want to overlook that and start putting the wrong ones on the wrong, because they're going to be different costs as well.
I was just going to ask you that. I said, why would I care? Couldn't I just put locks on everything, John?
I wouldn't, but lock you in the closet. You put the lock on the outside, but
well,
you got to wonder. Then the cops come, and then it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, who's screaming behind the door? I don't understand.
Yeah, right.
But no, there's a cost difference between a door with a lock costs more money than a closet type knob, and I believe both of those are more expensive than dummy knobs. So because the dummy knob has no internal parts, it has nothing that moves. You just basically screw it to the door. So so that's the reason. What about exterior doors, John?
Well, now you get into some money. Okay. You have different types of doorknobs on the exterior, and these are going to be for security. Okay. Not just to keep those doors closed, but for security. Right. So you're going to have different types of mechanisms. You're going to have your classic keyed type of entry. You're going to have your deadbolts, okay, and you're going to have keyless type of
electronic
locks on there too.
Yeah,
so
basically, right.
This is where some real money comes into, and I mean some real money. I mean up to over $500 for a lock set for a front door,
or maybe more if you get into a really high security situation. Correct. With special keys and all sorts of crazy kind of stuff.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. I will say that one of the things that you want to consider when you buy all this is to see if you can't match the keys when you're installing.
Yeah, so keys. So I spent a lot of time in the vending business, right? And of course, we had 8 billion keys. And folks, you really don't want to carry a lot of keys around if you can help it, because they do get rather heavy and they're problematic because you have to figure out which key goes where. It sounds simple, right? But it's actually it isn't simple. But there's some technologies out there. So there's keyless technology, number one, which is an electronic lock, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about matching keys. So there's keys are all done by numbers. If you've got a lock set, it's usually got a number on it. But actually, Kwikset's got a system out there, and I think some of the other ones do too, where you can you can push your key in, and the lock itself actually adjusts to your key, and it's pretty cool. They're a little bit pricey, but it's not really what you pay, it's what you get in this particular instance. And if you have to match a lot of keys to the doors, it's really a good alternative to trying to have a locksmith come in and match and set all your locks to the same key.
And I will say, Larry, that when you go out and you buy these locks, go ask the people. Let's say you go to one of the big box stores, ask them if they can key alike those locks. And they usually can.
Usually they can, yep.
They'll charge you for it.
Right.
It might be about $10 a piece, $8 or $10 a piece. But you know what? I am not going to carry around, 6 or 7 keys for my house. I like to have all my doors keyed the same.
Right.
So it's worth it to me.
Yeah, and we do for our rental properties. We actually do that because we can change the key codes in them easily, and that kind of thing. And so it has some benefit there too. If you're going to own investment properties, you want to have some way to change the lock codes. It makes it much easier, much more secure for your tenants. So as you turn properties over, so a little bit about that. Keyless, John, talk a little bit about keyless.
Well, this is the kind of thing you'll see on doors, with a keypad.
Yep.
There's some other fingerprint reader types now. This is kind of starting to become that kind of technology is starting to raise its head a lot more than it did before, especially with fingerprint type of thing. And the good news about all that kind of stuff is that it gives you flexibility. So if you have to allow people in your house, let's say that you've got some contract work going on and you're not there and you need to allow people to come in, that you can set these things up to give them temporary access, and time out.
Yep.
So there's a lot of advantages to that. And Larry, you're talking about, we're talking about electronical devices here. So there's got to be a fail-safe there too, I suppose, because if the battery backups go out or something gets, smashed or whatever, I am not that big on a keyless entry, especially in the front of my house, because I think it looks awful to me. But and back doors and things like that, it's great. It's great, that the kids can get in and you don't have to carry keys around and all that kind of thing. So
it's a trend. It's an upward trend. I mean, so my experience mostly with keys comes out of the vending industry, and unfortunately, those particular keys were almost all of them were high security locks, and actually breaking into a vending machine is not as easy as you would ever want to think. And so when we went with keyless there, every time we had power surges, we couldn't get in.
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company.
Well, that's John, we're going to have a show one of these days. John is quoting a line from a movie, and we're going to do a show on our favorite movie quotes. And folks, I'd give somebody $20 if they can tell me what that line comes from. They can send it to us in an email at questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. And if you can name the line, you're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company. You can tell me what movie that's from. I would like to know if you know. Anyway, I know which movie it is. And anyway, it makes me laugh.
But back to being serious now, Larry.
Back to being serious. We got locked out of several of our machines, and I'm going to tell you that was it was a pain in the butt. It really was. Now, I don't think that that's the case with the home keyless. I've never heard anybody getting locked out yet, but I have heard of batteries dying. And that's kind of an issue, right? So the battery's internal and the locks die and then they can't get in. But there are some fail-safes. I would say personally, in my case, if I were going to put keyless in, I wouldn't put it on every door. I'd just put regular keyed locks. Plus, they're kind of pricey. I mean, they are kind of pricey. But the door that you use a lot, you might put keyless on. And then the rest of them just go to regulars. That's just my suggestion. I mean, folks, it's all about choice. Do what you want. If you want keyless on everything, rock and roll, as far as I'm concerned. I know some guys that'll put it on for you if you live in the greater Atlanta area, too. Shameless plug. John, what about deadbolt? I want to make one other comment on keyless. So I've done several keyless installations for people, and there is one thing. This goes back to needing a router and a chisel. If you're the keyless situations, because they run on a motor, on an actual motor, they have to go into the door sets perfectly. There can be no catches when you close the door, or they don't lock properly. So I know every time that I've installed a keyless one, I've had to do not a lot, but I've had to router it out and make sure that it's very, very clean going in and out of the strike plate, or otherwise they don't work. They'll hit that strike plate and they immediately roll back into the lock, and they don't lock. So just be aware that if you're doing this as a DIY project, that the keyless, it's not that the tolerances are greater, but they don't. On a hand deadbolt, you can turn it closed a lot of times, and it's not an issue. You just turn it closed. But these keyless ones that I've put in, now this is just me, and I'm drawing from a small sample. But the keyless ones that I have, it has to be perfect. It has to be perfectly lined up, and then they work great. You close the door, it closes. You're good. But just be aware of that going into it. So anyway, deadbolts, John, talk about deadbolts.
Well, this is a really an important subject on this whole thing, because a deadbolt is really going to be, as most people know, it's going to be a long throw type of security device that goes way into the door frame and secured pretty good with some long screws going in there. But you want to make sure that these things go into more than just the trim of the door. You know what I mean? They actually go into the frame of the door, right? The door frame itself. So this is something that needs to be installed correctly. They need to they need to be put in to where they work smoothly. Once again, now you're dealing with two locks really on a door. Let's say on your front door, right? You got your regular striker, and then you've got this the deadbolt. So to make things really nice for you, those things have to work pretty smooth. Yeah. Otherwise, you're fighting those things all the time.
It's that bug list. You're going to handle it so much. If you don't take care of it, you're going to wish you had. It just drive you crazy, drive you nuts.
Yeah. And I will say that deadbolts come in a couple different varieties. One is that they might be keyed on the outside, and they're a flip lever on the inside, or they're keyed on both sides.
I would suggest don't ever key them on both sides. If you lock the door and you have a fire, you have a tough time getting out. And I think
that's exactly right, Larry. And that's one of the things that they say now. Back a ways ago was that they wanted you to have a keyed on the inside, so you couldn't, if you had glass on the outside, you couldn't break it and just reach in and flip it. So. Well, that was their take on it.
Here's my comment on that, right? And see if you agree with me, John. You're not going to stop somebody from breaking into your house, no matter what you do, because John and I deal in construction all day long. And folks, honestly, if I want to break in your house, I'm going to just break a window out, number one, or I'm just going to take a big sledgehammer, and if I hit your door hard enough. I mean, seriously, if I hit your door hard enough, I'll knock the whole door frame out. You're not as super secure as you really want to think about in your own house. And I'm not being negative. That's just how the construction techniques are. And, if somebody wants in, they're going to get in. I mean, gosh, John, remember here in Atlanta, they were breaking into the stores. How are they doing? They were driving cars through the front windows. I mean, right. If somebody wants in, they're going to get in. It is what it is, right?
But they couldn't get into that vending machine.
No, then they'd steal the vending machine.
Yeah, then they steal,
and they go torch it apart.
Yeah, but so anyways, that's where that came from. So I think most of the deadbolts these days are flipped on the inside and keyed on the outside. So
yeah, I think you won't pass code.
Be aware of that.
Yeah, I think you won't pass code if you don't have if it's keyed on both sides. I don't think that passes code anymore. I'm not sure, but anyway, we'll check on that. We'll get back to you on it. So anyway, what other considerations, John? What are the considerations on door locks and stuff?
Well, I think there's, I think it goes back to now that we've kind of covered the different types of door locks and doorknobs and things like that. You've got different styles. Let's talk about that for a second. Sure. That you've got just regular round doorknobs, and now most of the style these days is starting to go to levers types. And it's also the consideration for older folks that would have a hard time turning a doorknob,
right?
Is to install levers.
Yeah, there's levers. There's also handles, right, for the front doors.
Right. So when you go into exactly. When you go into a hospital, they're all levers, right? Because everybody's, and it's easy to open and close things. So that's kind of these are some of the considerations to think about. Also the finish, the style of those locks, the finish of those locks. Whether it's rubbed bronze, whether it's what you said, Larry, the polished, nickel stuff, it's, that whole thing, stainless, whatever. But it's, really the sky's the limit. And it really is going to come down to, how much do you want to spend? I think it really does go back to the budget. You can find anything that you want in this category. And you look around and it's kind of funny, folks. You walk into some place and never ceases to amaze me how much everything really is.
Right.
and you start adding things up, and you're like, wow, that when you're talking about $30-$40 a doorknob or more, it's like, yow, I mean, it goes right, so it adds up. So, anyways, I mean, that's I think one of the biggest considerations right there.
Yep, is style and finish. Yeah, and again, you go online. There's a billion choices. I mean, a bloody billion. Even in the big box store, they almost dedicate probably a good half an aisle is just the doorknobs. doors and door entry systems, I guess I'll call it. But man, I mean, there's just a ton of this stuff, and it's sky. You said it, John. It's sky's the limit. I mean, folks, do you know you can actually get an 18-karat gold doorknob? You have to find them. They're going to cost you a fortune, but you can get an 18-karat gold doorknob. I mean, hey. Isn't America great? That's what I have to say about that. Isn't America great?
Diamond studded.
So whatever. Lots of bling.
Yeah. The other thing I'll touch on here is that now most of these doors these days, everything's pretty standard.
Pretty standard.
So you can go in and most of the doorknobs do have an adjustment for what I'm about to say, but you really do need to kind of take some dimensions of your current doorknob. In terms of what's known as the back set from the doorknob off the edge of the door, as well as the thickness of the door. So most of these aren't a big concerned, but you need to just have that in your back pocket. So when you go shopping for these things, that you're aware of what you're buying.
Particularly if you're dealing with an older house.
That's a good point.
Because the thickness of the doors in particular has changed from, I can't remember what the dates would be, but I've been in doors that were built in the 40s, and they were not the same thickness as a modern door. And fortunately, the locks were able to be modified. The lock sets were able to be modified where they fit, but they were not the same thickness. So just be aware, particularly if you're now, the house I grew up in was built in 1812, and we had one original door, and gosh, it was less than an inch thick. And it was a solid door, weighed a ton, but it was less than an inch thick, and that was one of the original doors. So it has changed over the years, so just be aware. John's got a good point. Just be aware of that. So anyway. Well, let's talk a little bit about hinges and door stops, right? So, I mean, it sounds simple, right? Hinges and door stops. Well, I did a little research. I knew a bunch of different types of door stops, right? Now, hinges, folks, we're just going to say one thing about hinges. Match the hinges that you have now. Don't go and change the wheel, because unless you've set hinges, right, it is not, just match if you've got a 3-inch door with a round edge, go back with a 3-inch hinge with a round edge. Don't reinvent the wheel on that one. Really, you can if you want to. If you want to turn a small project into a big project, rock on, baby. Good for you. Yeah. We want to see the results. Put it on our Facebook page. We'll be thrilled. But in general, I'm going to tell you, go with, and if you need to take the hinge in when you go buy it, take a hinge off and go take it. Take a middle hinge out of one of your doors and take it in and match it. Just match it. Do yourself a favor. Choose the color, whatever it is you're looking to change on that hinge, and be happy with it. Just trust us on this one. Just match.
Right. And let me just and I'll add this, Larry. Just do one hinge at a time.
Yes, that's a great point, John. Thank you.
I know that might be obvious, but
it's
you don't
not.
need to take all your hinges off at once.
No, do not take all your hinges off at once.
Like Larry just said, if you want to make a project for yourself, rock on. But
yeah, good. Thanks, John, because I forgot about that one. Actually, these are some of the things we do it so often that we don't realize, what we talk about. But so that's hinges. Hinges are, relatively straightforward. But I will say, from the budgetary standpoint, there are different types of hinges. Buy decent hinges. So in this, I did a big commercial job not too long ago, and we actually got to use commercial hinges, and we did. It's in one of our previous episodes. I mentioned it was 22 or 23 doors, but we used commercial hinges. And folks, those hinges, really, the quality of those hinges is outstanding. And I'm going to tell you, buy a little bit better quality hinge. And how do you tell the difference? You almost can feel it. They feel heavier. They just look, it's just metal, but it looks better. If it actually looks better and it feels heavier, it's probably a little better hinge. So that's just kind of that's my opinion. But if you buy a decent hinge, you're not going to have any issues. If you cut, if you cut corners and you're buying them cheap, I'm going to say you might have some problems. So anyway, let's move on to door stops. So door stops, I forgot how many different types of door stops there was. I was originally thinking, well, there's the hinge mount door stops. There's a solid doorstop that you put into the baseboard, and then there's the spring doorstop that you put in the baseboard, and those are most of the ones for homeowners. But then I got into it, and I did a quick little search, and I was like, oh yeah, then there's wall protectors. So those are the things that you mount on the wall opposite the doorknob, so that when you and they're usually made of plastic or some kind of there's a bunch of different things that you can buy for that. Some of them are half dome bumpers, some of them are other types of like concave bumpers and things like that. You'll see those a lot in commercial operations where they use those half concave things, and the door hits it, and it actually lets the lock the locking mechanism go into the center of the thing and keeps the door from bouncing. But the object of a doorstop is to protect the wall. Have you ever been in a house where they didn't have a doorstop or they didn't have a wall protector, and there's a hole in the wall just opposite of the doorknob? So nod your head, because everybody's been in one of those, right? John, you've been in them. I've had rental properties. I can tell you almost every rental property.
I got one here.
You got one?
The doorstop on the baseboard was kicked off. Those springs.
Yep.
Next thing you know, you open up the door and boom.
And you have a drywall project.
Yeah.
A drywall and paint job,
Yeah.
So
make a little job a bigger job.
You're making a little job a bigger job. So that's the whole purpose of these things. But there's those are the basic kinds, and then there's also there's a doorstop that's called a pin hinge doorstop that you actually take one of the pin hinges out. Now there's two types of those. One, it looks like an L, usually is like an L, and it has a little screw thing. But there's another one that's very thin that fits in over the hinge itself, and it'll stop the door as it turns. And those are called pin stop doors, or pin stop door stops is what they are. Then there's also like half dome floor mount door stops that you'll see mostly like in commercial, but you can put them into your home as well, where they're the little half round and they've got a rubber bumper on them. And all of those it's your choice. Choose what you like. Choose what's going to work well for you, but do something, because otherwise you'll be doing drywall all the time. And it's also not good for your doorknobs too, actually, to let them just bounce into the walls. So, but there's a million choices. There's a million finishes. Pretty simple to put in generally. If you're going to do the floor mount ones, you need to line them up, and they need to be the right height off the floor. So if there's too much gap, they won't work. But if they're on the baseboards, just make sure they're up high enough that they catch the door and that they actually catch the door where they are. The hinge mount ones are relatively simple, pretty easy to put on. But all of these are things that you kind of need. Do you have anything to add there, John, on door stops?
No, not really. It's just I like the little ones that look like an L that just go on the door hinge,
Yep.
the hinge pin itself, and set down in there. I'm always forever kicking those little spring things off the off the baseboards.
Yep.
I hate those things,
Yep.
but and the other thing is that the little L stops, they kind of disappear. You don't see them.
Yeah, they do tend to go away. Now, my tip is when I do those, because I buy the sort of less expensive ones, but I put two on the door. I put one on the top hinge and one on the bottom hinge, and I do that largely just because I want to make sure they stop the door. And so that's just a me-ism, but you don't have to. Most people just put them on the top hinge, but I put them on the top and bottom. Just, I don't know. Just, it's me. It's me. What else do we have, John? What else do we have changing out hardware and stuff? Anything?
I think we covered most of it. For me, when I'm doing it, it is it's going to be the budget. It's going to be the look and the feel. Do I want the levers? All the things that we just talked about. And I think after you get done with that, I think it's a fairly straightforward replacement in most cases. It is in the cases of what I have done, not setting up new locks and things like that. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about replacing. So, when you think about doing this, I think these are the kind of things to take away from, is that, have your measurements, go in, pick out the kind of doors, within your budget, the new doorknobs and things. And you should be fairly straightforward to put them on in. Just follow the directions inside there, and you'll get really good at it after about 18 of them.
After about 18 of them,
you'll be like, wow, wish I was this good at the beginning of it because I would have been done 3 hours ago. So.
Spoken like a man who's done it a couple of times. That's what it sounds like to me. So So John, this is a question. The last time that spaceship landed in your yard, did they have a doorknob on the outside, or did you just put your hand on there, or what was the deal? How'd you get into that spaceship?
Well, I did. I walked in, and they had lost the keys to the vending machine, so now he's got to answer to the Coca-Cola company.
Oh, my God. Folks, with that, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please send us an email, questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. Go to our website and leave us a message. You can click on it. It's up on the right-hand corner there. There's a little button that says leave us a message. And that's, again, at handymanprosradioshow.com. You can join our Facebook group at Handyman Pros. Join in the conversation. And we're also on Twitter at Handyman Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.